Good morning, class. Welcome back to our study on the book of Proverbs. Last week we finished chapter 5. We were talking about the consequences of adultery. We're going to move now to a different topic. We're going to talk about money and the value of wisdom in preserving from poverty. That'll be in the first 11 verses of chapter 6. Solomon in this will warn against two practices that lead to poverty. One is foolish financial entanglements, and the other one is just pure laziness. And in a sense, both pertain to finance because the first one, entanglement, is unnecessary. It's an unnecessary loss of what you've earned. And laziness is against the inability to earn any money at all. So he's warning them about these financial entanglements. We're going to start by looking at verse 1 in chapter 6.
My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger.
My son occurs in verses 1, 3, and 20 of this chapter. And if a person co-signed a note involving high interest rates for someone else's loan, the co-signer was urged to get out of that obligation as soon as they could. In Israel, lending was intended as a means to help fellow Israelites, not as a money-making transaction like it is today. No interest was to be charged to a fellow Israelite. And that's talked about in Leviticus 23, 35, and 37, and I thought it'd be good if we looked at those two verses.
If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would a foreigner and stranger, so they can continue to live among you. Do not take interest or any profit from them, but fear your God, so that they may continue to live among you. You must not lend them money at interest or sell them food at a profit.
Now, interest could be applied to a loan to a non-Israelite. But even then, usury was illegal. You could not charge exorbitant interest rates. Exorbitant interest often resulted in injustice, and the law sought to prevent that as well. The warning in Proverbs 6:1 is not against borrowing or lending, but against being held accountable for another person's high interest loan. Putting up security is referred to frequently in the book of Proverbs. Some say the word neighbor here means stranger, and that co-signing is acceptable for one's relatives but not for strangers. The parallel word another suggests that co-signing is advised against altogether. Neighbor probably would be translated as anybody. So, does this exhortation speak against guaranteeing payment on a loan for one's own relatives? No. The restriction seems to be against loans with exorbitant rates of interest. And the striking hands in pledge was a gesture something like shaking hands in our culture. It was like signing on the dotted line. Now let's look at verse 2.
You have been trapped by what you said, ensnared by the words of your mouth.
The words trapped and ensnared indicate that by accepting responsibility for someone's high interest debt, the son would be placing himself in a financial situation over which he had no control. Agreeing by word of mouth to co-sign such a debt could lead to serious trouble. Verses 3 through 5.
So do this, my son, to free yourself. Since you have fallen into your neighbor's hands, go to the point of exhaustion and give your neighbor no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler.
In intense language, Solomon urged that a person who has agreed to be security for another's loan should seek to get out of that trap. To fall into your neighbor's hands means that the outcome of the situation is in the neighbor's control. And the word humble is a strong word, meaning to crush or tread oneself down, to demean, and pressure plea suggests being boisterous, loud. One should free oneself from a debt agreement, even if doing it demands great humiliation and obnoxious pleading. This urgency is stressed in verse 4 and 5, and nothing could stand in the way. Not even one night was to pass before the situation should be taken care of. Just as a gazelle or a bird, if trapped, would immediately begin struggling for its life, so a person snared by foolish debt and debt agreement would financially fight to be free. Now Solomon's going to warn his sons against laziness. That's in verses 6 through 11. We'll begin that topic by looking at verses 6 through 8.
Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest.
A person can become financially destitute by laziness as well as by foolish dealings. Solomon was probably not calling his son a sluggard. He was speaking rhetorically to anyone who might hear or read the message. The Hebrew word for sluggard occurs 14 times in Proverbs and nowhere else in the Old Testament. It refers to more than laziness. In 15:19, a sluggard is contrasted with the upright, and in the 21st chapter, a sluggard is contrasted with the righteous. A sluggard is associated in 1915 with the shiftless. A lazy, irresponsible person is challenged to learn from the ant and be wise. Ants, known for being industrious, are commended for their initiative. Apparently, ants have no leader, no commander to direct them, no overseer to inspect their work, no ruler to prod them on. Yet, they work better than many people under a leader. Ants also work in anticipation of future needs. They store up and gather while it's warm for when winter comes. The virtue of wisdom is not being busy, but in having a proper view of forthcoming needs that motivate one to action. Those who act only when commanded do not possess wisdom. Verses 9 through 11.
How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man.
By two questions, Solomon urged the sluggard to get out of bed and start working. Verses 10 and 11 repeat later in the 24th chapter, and they point up the danger of a person continuing to nap when he ought to be working. Poverty will come on him suddenly, and the same day a robber and an armed man quickly attacks an unsuspecting victim. Poverty is mentioned frequently in Proverbs. With his time squandered, the lazy person cannot rectify his situation. He has little or no money to meet his needs, and obviously such a person is unwise. The next topic is the value of wisdom in preserving from dissension. That's in verses 12 through 19. Solomon, by describing a person who deceives and stirs up strife, such a person engages in. Solomon urged his son to avoid disaster and God's hatred. In other words, don't go about stirring up trouble. Let's look at verse 12.
A troublemaker and a villain who goes about with a corrupt mouth.
The scoundrel and villain refer to one person, as evidenced by the use of the singular verb in these verses. Scoundrel literally means a man of Belial. That's Belial. Is someone who is worthless and wicked. Later, after this period of time, Belial came to be used of the devil because he's the most worthless, wicked person of all. A scoundrel is known by his corrupt mouth, his false and deceiving words. Verses 13 and 14.
Who winks maliciously with his eye, signals with his feet, and motions with his fingers, who plots evil with deceit in his heart. He always stirs up conflict.
I like this description of a scoundrel. By sinister body language, the scoundrel's actions contradict what he's saying. By winking and gesturing in one way with his feet and fingers, he signals certain messages to his fellow conspirators. He plans evil actions from a deceitful heart so that people are not aware of his intentions until it's too late. Though he feigns sincerity, underneath he is perverted and causes dissension, drawing others into discord or strife. Dissension is caused by hatred and uncontrolled temper, perversity, greed, and anger. Verse 15.
Therefore disaster will overtake him in an instant. He will suddenly be destroyed, without remedy.
Beside causing discord among the people by his deceptive words and his sinister gestures, a scoundrel brings disaster on himself. It comes unexpectedly and quickly, in an instant and suddenly, with no way to offset it. It's without remedy. Whether natural consequences or more direct divine intervention is in view is not clear, but his downfall is quick, complete, and certain. Verse 16.
There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him.
The Lord's hatred of the scoundrel's activities in verses 12 to 14 is described in verse 16 to 19. And these two sections are linked by the word stirs up dissension. The 6-7 pattern, which we're going to see in those verses, is also used in a similar pattern of other numbers, plus 1, that's used in Proverbs 30. Now, this kind of numerical pattern is not giving a complete list of everything that the scoundrel does, but it stresses the final item as the culmination or the product of all the things that have been mentioned before. So that's an interesting thing that they do with the language that thank goodness we have scholars who explain to us what that means. If we're not into algebra, we might not pick up what that is. So let's look at verses 17 to 19.
Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community.
Here are the things God hates. A person with haughty eyes, in other words, a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that murder, shed innocent blood, a heart that plots wicked actions, feet that move quickly into sin, and one who lies against someone when witnessing in court. That is a person who causes discord among friends, and apparently, by his lies, he causes friends to be suspicious of each other. Lying, referred to twice in this list of things God hates, is one of the many wrong uses of the words that are condemned in Proverbs. The scoundrel uses various parts of his body in violation of the commands in the 23rd through the 26th verses of the 4th chapter. And it's seen in these passages that the heart, the mouth, the lips, the eyes, the tongue, the hands are all used. The value of wisdom in preserving from sexual immorality, we come again to that topic, is talked about from 6:20 all the way through chapter 7, the 27th verse. And we'll look at that as soon as we finish chapter 6. 5 times in the chapters 1 through 9, Solomon spoke of the problem of sexual immorality. Proverbs 20 to 35 warns against adultery, and chapter 7 illustrates the seductress ways and the consequences of involvement with her. Verses 20 to 25 discuss wisdom preserves from adultery. Verses 21 and 22.
My son, keep your father's command, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them always on your heart. Fasten them around your neck.
Solomon is once again exhorting his son to heed his mom and daddy's instruction and adhere to them inwardly and have his life guarded by them. Verses 22 and 23.
When you walk, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you. For this command is a lamp, this teaching is a light, and correction and instruction are the way to life.
Parental instruction provides guidance, protection, and counsel. That teaching should be given from God's law, for the parents' commands, like the Word of God, should be a lamp and a light, giving guidance to one's conduct. We all know Psalm 119, 105. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, a light unto my path. Discipline, though painful, helps keep a person on the right path, leading him to the way of life. Verse 24.
Keeping you from your neighbor's wife, from the smooth talk of a wayward woman.
Wisdom acquired from God's Word, taught by one's parents, helps protect from adultery. The immoral woman, or woman of evil is literal translation, perhaps unmarried, maybe the prostitute mentioned in verse 26, and she's sexually promiscuous, or maybe a sexually promiscuous married woman. And in verse 26, she is called an adulteress, literally, wife of a man. Verse 25.
Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes.
This verse gives a warning, and verses 26 to 29 and 32 to 35 speak of the reason for that warning. Lusting is in one's heart after a physically attractive and sexually promiscuous woman, whether married or unmarried, is wrong. Jesus spoke along a similar line in Matthew 5:28, where he says, if you lust after a woman, you have already committed adultery with her in your heart. Men who have fallen into sin of adultery have often begun with lustful thinking or lustful looking. A man looks at such a woman, she may seek to captivate him with her flirting eyes. Verse 26.
For a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life.
Immorality is costly. A prostitute can reduce a man to utter poverty, having only a loaf of bread by spending money for her services. And a wayward wife can prey on one's very life, that is, bring him to ruin and death. Verses 27 to 29.
Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished.
One cost of sexual unfaithfulness is stated in verse 26 and another in verse 27 through 35. Dire consequences are inevitable and secure. It is impossible to hold fire in one's lap without burning his clothes, or to walk on coals without burning one's feet. So it is impossible to commit adultery with another man's wife without being harmed. Illicit sex is like playing with fire. Such a man will be punished, possibly by that woman's husband. Verses 30 to 33.
People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his hunger when he is starving. Yet if he is caught, he must pay sevenfold, though it costs him all the wealth of his house.
People may sympathize with, but not approve of, a thief if he's attempting to avoid starvation. However, he had to repay sevenfold even if it cost him everything, similar to the man being reduced to a loaf of bread. The thief punishment, though difficult, is less severe than the adulterer. One who steals another's wife finds no forgiveness and no leniency. Verses 32 to 35.
But a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself. Blows and disgrace are his lot, and his shame will never be wiped away. For jealousy arouses a husband's fury, and he will show no mercy when he takes revenge. He will not accept any compensation. He will refuse a bribe, however great it is.
Involvement in adultery shows one's stupidity. He goes ahead in his sin while knowing that severe consequences will follow. He destroys himself. Adultery is a kind of suicide. Also, he's disgraced and shamed in contrast to the thief. And an adulterer is despised. And the wife's husband, learning about their conduct, becomes jealous, furious, and vengeful against the adulterer, apparently blaming the guilty man more than his wife. The anger of such a husband cannot be dispelled by bribery, no matter how great it is. Bribery is frequently condemned in Proverbs and in the law. That concludes chapter 6. Next time we will jump into chapter 7 and move forward with our study in the book of Proverbs. Have a great week.